Now for global business updates, Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers out there. We begin with the Biden ultimatum to Israel. What happens next, essentially, and how oil prices are going to be reacting. So essentially, does Israel go it alone to Rafah? If that's the case, you'll see oil prices likely climb. Does Israel, heed the warning from the United States and decide to hold off on heading over to Rafah? If that's the case, then you see oil prices recede. But then there's also the fact that there's a fundamental story in here, in addition to the geopolitical concerns. So if you take a look at U.S. stockpiles, we got these figures from the Energy Information Administration, where U.S. crude stockpiles fell by 1.36 million barrels per day. And there's an inverse relationship here. It says that if inventories are falling, well, that means that demand is increasing, right? So oil prices will rise on that. If inventories are rising, well, that means that demand is falling, and so oil prices will probably recede on that news. So that's what we've been seeing. So this is coming along with what's been going on between Israel and Hamas. So what folks are doing is to take both in tandem and see how much, and then of course you've got OPEC meeting, that will be coming up as well. How does all that play together? So it's all in there. More geopolitical matters. The European Union decided yesterday that they will use Russian assets that have been frozen with the Central Securities Clearinghouse in Belgium, Euroclear, to aid Ukraine. So it's a total of 190 billion euros that is being of frozen Russian central bank assets that's being held there. So what they're saying is about 3 billion euros a year is going to be sent over to the Ukraine. The first payout is due in July. About 90% of that is going to be used for weapons. To go to China, trade data that just came out from China's customs agency. You see trade in April. Exports increased by 1.5%. Imports climbed by 8.4%. So China demand ramping up, right? But look at U.S. Exports to the U.S. fell 3%. Exports to the EU fell 3.5%. So there's a narrative there with the kind of trade restrictions, particularly on chips, and the allies that are working with the U.S. to try to reduce those chips. Of course, chips won't make up the entire 3% drop for the U.S. and 3.5% for the EU. But notice that Asia, at least the ASEAN region, that is still healthy in terms of trade for China. Still in Asia, Toyota, we've been talking earnings all week with UBS on Monday, Disney on Tuesday. Toyota released its figures for quarter 4 of this year, and they're pretty healthy. The revenue coming in at, we converted this from yen to dollars, so 292 billion, 21% climbed, 11.1 vehicles across all brands sold, 5% drop. Their operating profit was a record. If you convert, that's about 5 trillion yen. Apparently, they're the first Japanese company to break a 5 trillion yen threshold when it comes to their operating profit. Net profit coming in at they doubled their net profits, 31 billion. But if you look at battery-only EVs, pure play electric vehicles, that accounted for only 1% of their global sales. Toyota made the astute, what is now seen as an astute decision, to sell more hybrids, to where you've got a mixture of ICE, which is internal combustion engines, and also electric vehicles. So they sold more hybrids, and that strategy seems to have worked for them, because it seems like demand for EV seems to be waning just a tad. We come to matters in Nigeria. I heard Dr. Abate mention Taiwo Oyedele earlier on, the chair of the Fiscal and Tax Policy Committee. He was essentially misquoted, saying that, well, within context, some of media outlets said he was calling for a straight upward review of value-added tax. But in a tweet, a Twitter thread that he broke down, he essentially said that, listen, there's a number of other measures that need to be taken before an upward review of VAT takes place. And his point was that businesses in Nigeria are not able to offset their input VAT. So as an example, if you're a pure water company and what you spend on plastics, or what you spend on auditors, or what you spend to basically sell your pure water, you are not able to offset that VAT internally. So you see the tweet there, I think that's from the Cable. It says we need to increase VAT, says Taiwo Oyedele. It says this is quoted out of context to suit the objective of the author. What are the issues? I encourage everybody to go to his Twitter page and read them. But essentially what the meeting they had, he said, First of all, let us allow businesses to offset their input VAT. And then he also said the states, the different states in the country that have different taxes, those need to be cleared out. So when you do that, businesses can then take up enough savings to where if an upward review of VAT takes place, businesses will not be affected. And there are a number of exemptions as well, education and health, I think. So I do encourage everyone to go read that thread from Mr. Oyedele. And finally, look, Kendrick Lamar, Spotify, Apple, streaming services he's broken a number of records. I think the one-day streaming record for on Spotify, which was previously held by Drake, over 11 million streams. Number one on Apple's charts in, I think, about 40 countries or so. And I think it's going to be number one on Billboard as well. So you've seen a big resurgence. And it's not just that, because he's such an incredible lyricist. On the education side, you've got professors in universities and teachers talking about the impact it had. Here's one high school teacher in particular.
If anyone needed further proof that Kendrick is winning this thing, you should have stepped foot in a high school today. I, up until today, taught at a very Drake-centric high school. Rich Baby Daddy is the most frequently requested song to put on my class playlist. If I ask students what they're listening to in their headphones, Drake. The week after the leak was a nightmare. But today, I walk in and I can feel that there has been a tectonic shift. The second I walked into the building, I could hear the buzz. I could kind of overhear the conversations, and I was like, oh my God. This is a Kendrick school now. I polled my classes on what they thought, and they were ready to throw down for Kendrick. I had like one Drake defender in each class, if that. And honestly, I feel bad for those kids because they were getting screamed at. I had a kid walk into class, phone over his head, blasting BBL Drizzy. And then he went up to his friends and got them to freestyle on it. Like, excuse me? This was a Drake high school. I have students who hate reading who are doing the most meticulous, close reading of these lyrics that I have ever seen. They're finding subtle quadruple entendres and explaining them eloquently to their peers. This is a cultural moment and a true educational experience for everyone.
Students that hate reading, they are reading because of Kendrick Lamar. Impressive stuff. That's our updates for today.
Fantastic. I was going to actually talk about the Microsoft the story, because but before I go on, I'm sure this set looks emptier than it was earlier on. Unfortunately, Rufai had to excuse himself for this morning, and as he's feeling quite unwell. So we apologize that we wouldn't have him on set for the full show, but we look forward to having him back again tomorrow when he's feeling much better. All right, so like I was saying earlier, just now, Rotus, I read the statement by Microsoft, and I know you spoke about this yesterday during GBR, but in terms of what happened, there were announcements and there have been confusions around that. We haven't spoken about it yet here, about the fact that there were talks about Microsoft closing its African Development Center here in Lagos. Now, I recall that in 2019, Microsoft had talked about or launched a $100 million investment over 4 years in Lagos and Kenya. And of course, this was received with a lot of excitement. I mean, everyone loves a good investment, especially from a company like Microsoft. And that plan was to hire world-class engineers, local talents here in Nigeria, and just set up their base here. Now, what this means, according to that statement, and that's why I wanted to clarify, was that they said, oh no, we're still operational, but we've let go of our engineering unit. But that's the whole point of the African Development Center. So if the core of the organization or the development center has been taken out, then it's a shell that's remaining. So what is left there? Then the question I was going to ask you was that I know that the Kenyan office is also quite apprehensive as to whether they would be next. I want to find out from you, Rotus, are they going to also close down their Kenyan African Development Center? Because then that would perhaps speak to the reason. Some people have touted an unfriendly business environment for them, for Microsoft, yet another company that had invested in Nigeria, leaving divesting and things like that. So I just wanted you to just touch on that this morning, because that's $100 million over 4 years, job losses, engineers, it's quite concerning, especially under this administration.
So if within the global context, if you've looked at when we've discussed Meta's earnings, Microsoft earnings, a number of these tech companies are spending a lot of capital expenditure on AI, right? Yeah. There's a lot of money they are spending. And as a result, you have seen layoffs across the tech and big tech. Even Tesla is still laying people off right now as we speak. Microsoft and so on and so forth. We reached out to them. They told us it is only the development center in Lagos that is being impacted. I asked them to give me a breakdown of their full footprint across Nigeria. They're going to be sending that over to us, so where they say that their footprint is still pretty healthy. As for the Kenya death center, as of now, they're saying there's not going to be any changes, but it's within a global context.
So why Nigeria? But that's all. I'll just
Okay, by way of summary, you brought latest trade data from China, as released by the China Customs Agency yesterday, or this morning. This morning. Solid trade data, because of the improvement year on year, about 1.5% improvement year on year, on the average. Yes, exports may have reduced to US and all of that, but they are doing very well in Southeast Asia, where China remains very dominant. Now, the thing about Oyedele, yes, I made a point earlier on before he joined us, that this is still at the level of a proposal. Yeah. Even if you want to do anything about VAT, you still have to back it up with legislation. But what his committee is proposing, apart from the exemptions you talked about, for food, healthcare, and education, those are the three items. Yeah. They are also talking about rebalancing the taxation regime. They are talking about protecting the poor. They are proposing, making it easier for you to get refund on VAT. Yeah. And then they are saying you will not have to pay VAT on exports. Yeah. So these are, some of the issues in that package, but it's for Nigerians to debate and see, and then to ensure that while protecting the poor, you also do not punish the rich, because you can't be robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yeah. But it's still at the level of a proposal. Finally, I wanted to talk about Neuralink. You recall that in January, we were celebrating the success made by Neuralink when a gentleman, they were successful. I think the man's name is Arnold, something like that. But now they have reported a setback, that there's been some disconnect. But Neuralink is not the only company involved in BCI. It's called brain-computer interface. But when I read the story, I just thought, well, maybe man cannot play God in the long run. But if they succeed with it, the thing about science is trial and error and perfection. Yes. At the end of the day, I think it will be a major advancement for humanity. And persons who are paralyzed will still be able to live very normal life. Indeed. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.